of the role players. Well, I'm about to sit here and tell you that the role players ain't going to play as good in Boston.
That's fair.
Also, Duncan Robinson, brother, how come you can't hit a wide open fucking shot? Twice. Also,
Yeah.
I'm also here to tell you that Jimmy Butler's foul at the end was just a foul and not a 3-point shot foul.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking that was a 3-pointer either.
It was a 3-pointer. He was behind it, but
Oh,
he went. That's a swipe through. That's just a common foul. 2 shots.
oh, I got what you're saying. Not a shooting foul.
I mean, in my opinion, did Jimmy Butler even have control of the ball long enough to even consider it like a foul?
Also, did Eric Spoelstra learn nothing from the San Antonio Spurs series? Don't box out. You box out, you win. You're going to the finals.
Hey, yeah. I learned to box out in fourth
First of
grade,
all,
bro.
first of all, if at the end of the game, okay, you give me anybody on the floor. If it's not Tatum and it's not Brown, if Marcus Smart hits a 3 to force game 7, I'll live with that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Chances are low on that one. I can't
I
believe it was him that took the shot.
well they doubled. It's
they
because
dumb.
the out of bouncer doubled Tatum, which allowed what's his face to go right to the hole to tip it in.
Yep. Well, we just kicked off the show with an impromptu little uh NBA basketball from last night's show because I was gonna ask you guys your opinion on that tip in last night. Watching when he did that, I went oh, and my wife was like, "What just happened?" I was like, "He tipped it in, and they just forced Game 7 within 3 seconds." Like it was just
Yeah,
I put
dude.
money
incredible.
on it.
Great
Yep,
play by Derek White.
definitely a great play. Um, let's get to the heart of our show because the Big Ten, and this went in effective January 1st of this year, the Big Ten signed a $7 billion TV deal, though, guys. $7 billion TV deal with NBC, CBS, and Fox. It is, um, the deal expires in 2030 and it is rumored to at least allow 80 to $100 million per team, and then eventually will allow the conferences to soon be 16 member universities to share more than $1 billion per year. When the USC and UCLA join the Big Ten. Um, Now I read so something interesting is NBC will have a will still remain their affiliation with Notre Dame through this. However, though, NBC will host a 7:30 Saturday night game at prime time, which will be called Big Ten Saturday Night. CBS will get an afternoon game until their contract with the SEC expires at the end of this year. And Fox will get the big noon kickoff and their normal choice of the Big Ten games, the 2 afternoon main slots, and then they normally do their primetime games on Fox for the Pac-12. So this is actually a huge deal. What are your guys' opinions on we're just gonna do like kind of like a roundtable, if you guys will, discussion here about, this big TV deal and what this really means for the Big Ten Conference and what you guys are excited about it.
Hope you like 3:30 games, Nick.
Love them. Love them.
because CBS is going to take a bunch of Michigan and Ohio State games, 100%. Penn State too. I think the loser out of it is going to be Fox because Fox is going to end up broadcasting Maryland Rutgers at noon because you're going to have a lot of smaller schools. Now, the good thing about it is it's not like a Texas deal with ESPN where it's one school making so much money. You're spreading the wealth around to all the schools, which is going to help the Big Ten as a conference because you're going to get essentially all around. You get more TV exposure to the teams that don't get TV exposure, like Rutgers, Maryland, things like that, outside of just being close proximity. And it also allows those schools to showcase the talent that is on their team, which in turn will help draft more Big Ten players.
So, so sorry, I misspoke here. So after the 2023 season, it looks like CBS still has the SEC on at its 3:30 Eastern time. So the Big Ten won't get that afternoon slot on CBS until after um their deal runs out with the SEC, it looks like. So I
Yeah,
do
but you're still
apologize about that.
no, but they're
My
still. I
apologies.
mean, they're still going to take Michigan and Ohio State games away from Big Noon and whatever. Plus, I love CBS music for football season.
Yep.
Can't wait to see the Big
Yep.
Ten with that.
Absolutely, Drew.
Um, yeah, I mean, this is great for the conference. Obviously, each team making at least 75, 80 mil a year is huge, especially for Rutgers, Indiana, Northwestern, the little guys. Um,
That's gonna be huge for their NIL
oh, absolutely.
too.
And I think that this deal just helps grow the conference. I fully expect us to expand further in conference and grab some more teams. Um, I think we're going the way of two power conferences, and luckily the Big Ten will be one of them. Um, I look forward to a Big Ten Saturday night on NBC. That should be fun. Um, it's a good deal for the conference.
Absolutely. I do think, like you were mentioning, Drew, the 75, 80 to up to $100 million that some of the universities can get is actually going to be huge, like you said, for like your Purdue's, your Northwesterns, your Maryland's, Rutgers of the Big Ten. That's going to give them a lot more funding than they previously had, which is going to help sustain to build them into maybe not like a perennial powerhouse, right? But a program that's maybe it's okay to be middle of the pack if you're Maryland and Rutgers. You know what I mean? At least you're now not in the bottom half of the Big Ten every single year, you know? So like if you're in that middle pack, that's really good. You're playing in probably meaningful bowl games. Maybe you're on the cusp of becoming a college football playoff team. Now that it's going to be expanded into 12. So I think all of that is really, really good. What I do worry though, with this TV deal is, are we gonna force teams to like are we going to force bad games that would normally be on like the Big 10 network, and are we going to put them in like on the national stage?
I
Because
don't. No, go ahead.
let's face it, there we have seen some pretty awful games, right? Like I just don't see Rutgers, Maryland being on big noon kickoff. Now, Core, I mean, and you may be right, Core, like you said, like they may have no other choice but to pick a game like that when CBS steals Ohio State and Michigan that week, or Penn State, Michigan that week. You know what I mean? And NBC already has Ohio State at their prime time.
I mean, but Big Noon kickoff. I mean, last year, Michigan, Connecticut. Michigan won what, 55-3. I mean,
I
you
guess,
still
yeah.
have those games. So I mean, at least for big noon kickoff standpoint, Fox is saying, okay, instead of that, we're going to have two Big Ten teams. For instance, Ohio State and Indiana opens a season this year,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's two Big Ten teams, so that's how they're going to do it. The other thing is the money that they're getting, these smaller schools maybe can develop their facilities a little better and can start to get better talent because they have better weight rooms. They have better football facilities because obviously at these bigger schools, we know what Oregon has, we know what USC has, we know what Ohio State has, we know what Michigan has. Michigan, when you look at Northwestern's weight
You know what
room,
you're getting in
it
the shower
doesn't
at Penn
compare.
State. You
That's
know?
that's right.
You
It
know what you're
doesn't it
getting in the
doesn't
shower at Penn State.
Oh,
but I mean, it doesn't. These facilities can grow,
Right.
which in tune can help. I mean, obviously, Maryland has top of the line facilities because of Under Armour, right,
Right.
being developed there and being right there. However, teams like Northwestern who don't have gigantic spaces like some of these college campuses have, they
Time out.
can they
Time
can
out. Before
develop.
you
They can
go
develop.
further with that statement about Northwestern, have you seen their facilities?
Well, yeah, it's in
The,
the Chicago. Yes, but
oh no, no,
what I'm saying
like
is,
their workout room. Have you like seen
yeah,
their updated? Oh my God, that thing is amazing.
100%. But I'm
Overlooking Lake
saying, but
Michigan. Oh
it's a wealthy
again,
private school. Yeah,
yeah.
right.
Oh
I
makes
yeah.
mean, but
sense.
well, but Northwestern is not one that would need the funding. But like
No,
when you go like and you look at
that's what
some
I was
of
trying to say.
some of those other schools, I mean, but still, Northwestern TV exposure is not something they get. When you look at the TV schedule and you look at Northwestern, how many Northwestern games are actually on cable television outside of the ones on Big Ten Network that are
When
just
they're
games that don't matter or when they're playing? The only exposure they get is when they play
Penn State, Ohio
Ohio
State,
State,
Michigan State,
Michigan, and
Ohio.
Penn
Yeah,
State.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
it.
You're
Hmm.
right.
So, I mean, money wise, Northwestern maybe not need it for the facilities, but I'm sure Minnesota, who just updated their facilities, could update their facilities a little bit more to help with recruiting. They can
Now,
put more money in recruiting. They can put that funding that's going to come. The other thing is like I said, they're going to get more TV exposure. You said, you're not sure that Big Noon will carry those games. I don't think they're going to have a choice. They're going to have with that money in the Big Ten, there's going to be some sort of laws that are going to put all of those teams in certain spots. It's just the way it's going to happen. I don't think that it's going to go, oh, this conference is going to get this game. I can promise you, Big Noon is probably going to try to keep Michigan and Ohio
what
State.
what do you think? God, what Drew? Let me ask you this: what do you think if the three networks got together and they looked at like like in the summer, they're looking at the schedules and they go, okay, we have three major big games. Like let's just say for like this upcoming season, right? You have Ohio State Notre Dame, which no matter what is going to be on NBC. So NBC says we already have the Notre Dame TV contract. We're going to put them at 7:30 prime
Well, and it's
time.
at Notre and
And
it's
it's at
at Notre
Notre
Dame,
Dame, so no matter
so
what,
it's
it would be on
automatically.
NBC
Yeah.
anyways, which is fine. So you would say, okay, that game's figured out. Well, then you look at Fox and and then NBC. So maybe that was a bad example, but okay, so you have like three major games within the Big Ten itself, Drew. You have Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Penn State this year, and Ohio State, Michigan, obviously at the end of the year. I do you think that that Fox, NBC, and CBS sit down at the beginning of the year and they look at the big games and they say, here's how we're going to work that out. Like
Yeah,
NBC says we're gonna take Penn State, Michigan, and put them in prime time.
calling dibs.
Yeah,
Yeah, I I don't know for sure, but I assume that there's a pecking order. I assume that Fox has first choice, so Fox kind of gets whatever they want, and then the leftovers go to CBS and NBC because Fox holds like the majority of the games. So like 50% of the games are Fox, maybe 25 CBS, 25 NBC. So I assume that Fox gets the first pick, and I assume that Michigan, Ohio State will never move from Fox on noon on Fox,
Right. Big noon
But
kickoff.
I
Yeah.
don't know for sure, but I assume that since the Big Ten and Fox have worked together for so long, that they are the top dog. They get the top choice.
Do you think it's potentially we could see with this new TV deal, maybe not this season, with the TV contracts that are still, valid like this CBS with the SEC. Do you think it's possible, guys, that we could see eventually down the road Ohio State and Michigan moved out of that noon time slot and maybe back into the 3:30 or even the prime time night game
I
with this new
wish.
TV deal?
I wish. Can you imagine tailgating all day and the amount of magnitude of a top five matchup at night? Can you imagine?
Yeah.
It's crazy at noon. Can you imagine? The thing is what's going to end up happening is I don't personally think it's going to be a dib situation. I think it's going to be a time situation. Big noon kickoff, it's going to base on what times the times come out for each game. Okay, so Michigan and Ohio State's at noon. That's on Fox. If you have Michigan Penn State, let's say in at 3:30, you might end up getting that on CBS. If you have Ohio State Penn State at night, that might be on NBC. I think it's just going to be about the timing of the schedule. Now, granted, with that being said, I think all of those networks are going to have a say in what time some of those games are, 100%. But I think, I, Nick, you and I have talked about it for years. I wish Michigan and Ohio State would play at 7 o'clock. I 100% wish they would. In November at night, it's cold. It's awesome. I don't think there would be a better environment in college football. But we've played at noon for decades and decades and decades, and you
It's
think Fox is
tradition.
going to give up their $100 million that they make in the one Saturday of Michigan Ohio State? Doubtful.
Nah,
So I
they're
think
not.
I think it's going to be a noon game for the rest of our lives. But again, it to be honest, it may move just because it won't matter because of
It
the new 12-team format. It won't matter.
yeah. Yeah, it seems like one of the things that this deal has a part of it is that it's kind of breaking the traditional Big Ten scheduling up where we don't play night games in November or like weekday games. Like now we've got multiple Black Friday games. Penn State Sparty, I think, is like an 8 o'clock kick in November. Um, so
I think it's the same week as Michigan Ohio State.
okay.
I think it's just I think it might be the same weekend.
Like I don't really have any issues with that. Night games in November, that's fucking awesome.
That's football up
Um,
here in the north. That's what
yeah,
that's what we are used to.
yeah. And obviously primetime games usually get the best ratings. So
Unless you're
uh,
Ohio State, Michigan playing
that'd be
at
fun.
noon.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. And
Like,
like to me, there's just some traditions that you don't want to break in college football. We're already killing a lot of traditions by just expanding the playoff and doing all this conference realignment and stuff. So like you got to keep some tradition alive.
absolutely. We're gonna I want to get back to what you just said about tradition when that aspect of the college football playoff, Drew. Um, but before we go to that, NBC or in Notre Dame, outside of the COVID year because they were really forced to, has been traditionally a independent school and has always maintained that they're going to remain independent and not join a conference, right? Is this deal that NBC signed moving that needle point towards an affiliation with Notre Dame now in the Big Ten?
Nope.
Yeah, I don't think
because
so.
Notre Dame traditionally plays Michigan every year, traditionally plays Michigan State every year,
Okay.
traditionally plays 3 or 4 Big Ten teams. Now, they haven't played Michigan in a few years. I know it's coming back, and I think like a couple 5 to 10 years. I think it's coming back. Um, Whatever, but I Notre Dame is one of the very few teams that whether they are good or they are bad, they get ratings on NBC. And so I think that that alone, because they are Notre Dame, because of who they are, because of the tradition, they will remain independent. Now, with that being said, I think that at a point that will hurt them when it comes to college football playoff because I think a 2 loss Notre Dame team maybe is not in over a team that played a conference schedule.
Especially, and I don't think you're wrong there, Core. Drew, I'm gonna get your thoughts, but I have a follow up here to Core. Go ahead.
Uh, yeah, I just think that the Notre Dame and the ACC are too much in love with each other. If they were to join a conference, which I don't think they will either, I think they'll be forever independent. They're just kind of like that, and they're a blue blood, so they can get away with it. Plus, they have their own TV channel. Uh, but I think if anything, they would go to the ACC.
Okay, so you actually brought it up here for me. There's rumors that the ACC is gonna disband. There are rumors that North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Virginia, Clemson,
Miami, Florida State.
Miami, Florida State, NC State have all reached out to either the Big Ten or the SEC about potentially joining their conference when their contracts are up with the ACC within the next couple years. So, hearing all those rumors, about these schools reaching out to the Big Ten, the SEC, to me, it only makes sense for Notre Dame to come and join the Big Ten. It only makes sense for them to come and join the Big Ten because, like Corey was mentioning, eventually they're going to have to join a conference if they're going to want to play in the playoff, if unless you want to go undefeated. Because I have a feeling, like Corey was saying, that Notre Dame as a 2 loss team may not have the resume as another 2 loss team that played within a conference, and I'm looking at a Penn State. If Penn State loses to USC and let's say Michigan, but beats Ohio State and runs a little of a gauntlet and beats some of these Big Ten teams, beats a UCLA, beats Michigan State, and all these teams. How do you value that over Notre Dame, whose only 2 big games, quote unquote, were Ohio State and Michigan on their schedule, or Michigan USC on their schedule, and they lost both of those big games. The only top teams that they would have played all year, they lost to. So how do you get them in? And I think that's what's going to hurt. And I think that's why, and also with NBC also having a very large hand that they could really force Notre Dame into, because of the TV aspect, with their national draw and everything. They could easily tell Notre Dame, you got to join the Big Ten, man. You got to join a conference at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it happening if the ACC disbanded, but I don't think the ACC is going anywhere. I know all these teams are whatever. I think the Pac-12 is going to disband before the ACC, because I think outside of once UCLA and USC are gone, those are the two big. You have obviously Oregon, but I think Oregon's going to end up joining the Big Ten too. Um, but that's another story. I don't see the ACC disbanding I also could see you if Notre Dame decides to, or NBC decides to put Notre Dame in a weird spot. I could see Notre Dame just reaching out to ESPN, and I could see Notre Dame. Notre Dame is
They would be,
so
but they're
big.
in a, but they're in a big deal.
It,
ESPN just signed a
I,
massive deal with the SEC to control basically everything.
I understand, but I'm saying, but Notre Dame is one of those few teams that is so large with everything they do, with the amount of viewers and the amount of fans that Notre Dame has. It's one of those things where they could basically develop their own network and put it on cable television and people would watch it.
See,
So
Texas tried the same thing with the Texas Longhorns network, and it didn't really do well for them.
that's because Texas fell flat on their face. Texas, after they signed that contract, and now to be fair, when Texas had that deal, when Texas signed that deal, ESPN was not at the place it is right now.
You're not wrong, but Drew, so Texas signed that massive deal, falls flat on their face. Notre Dame, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because you grew up in that Catholic atmosphere with all the, as your brother likes to call them, the fake Catholics up there in South Bend. Um, Outside of the Brian Kelly era, I don't remember in at least our lifetimes where Notre Dame has been a national title talk about. I mean, and let's just be honest, he played 1 year. 1 year out of his tenure at Notre Dame, he was in the national championship, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm saying though is you saw Marcus Freeman's first year. He went at what, 8-4? What if you're talking about joining a conference and your main source of income is telling you to join a conference, how do you tell them no and risk starting your own network and falling on your face like you did with like Texas did, but you're already on your face.
Uh, wow. Uh, I don't know. I I don't know. This year, I'm looking at Notre Dame's schedule for this year right now, and they have 5 ACC opponents this year. So basically, they're an ACC team
Well, that's
without the correct affiliation.
well, that's because I think when they joined in basketball because they wanted to join a basketball conference, and I think that was a deal with the ACC said that you can join basketball, but you're going to play a majority ACC football schedule.
But on Notre Dame's schedule, do they play USC?
Yeah,
Correct,
They
but
play UCLA.
no,
correct. No.
They
just
play
just
who do they play
Ohio
in the Big
State.
Ohio State? Well, normally it feels like normally they would play like a Purdue and kind of thing like
Yeah,
that too.
traditionally.
They traditionally play a couple Big Ten teams. I
Yep,
just
Purdue
I
next
don't
year.
yeah I don't. The thing is in a rebuttal to your point, Nick, they did it. NBC didn't host college football until Notre Dame.
Yeah, and that deal's
So
been going on for quite a while.
I mean, like they had NBC where NBC wouldn't be able to be in the Big Ten conversation if Notre Dame wasn't able to do what they did by themselves on NBC. Every Saturday on NBC, you can catch Notre Dame outside of a bye week.
Correct. But what I'm saying though is you're not wrong in that aspect, Core, but on the other side of that, the Big Ten will now have four, five, six. Let's just say six programs that are going to need primetime spots or afternoon games, not just noon. Because when you're going to add, you already have Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. All three of those teams could play the majority of their schedule prime time on all three of Fox, at CBS, and NBC every single week, right? Well, what happens when you add USC and UCLA into the mix? Now, one of those five teams are going to get bumped out of prime time and moved to that afternoon or noon time slot. Well, what happens when you add Michigan State back into it? So what I'm saying though is now Notre Dame, you were right. For these 40 something years that Notre Dame has only been on NBC, they haven't had to compete with anybody else on that network or for that network's TV time. Notre Dame could say, NBC, we want to play USC and Michigan primetime. Oh, not a problem. We can work our entire schedule around that week by week. But when you're adding now in Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan State, UCLA, USC, and you could even, I mean, Wisconsin. No, if Nebraska gets good, now you're up to 8 teams, and then you add and then now NBC is concerned about Notre Dame, and they're pulling millions of viewers for Wisconsin, Nebraska. All I'm saying is Notre Dame is going to start having to compete for that time slot. And if you go 8-4, why would NBC choose you over a 9-3 or 10-2 potentially Wisconsin team, Nebraska, USC, UCLA? That's all I'm saying.
Because hundreds of millions of people watch Notre Dame on NBC regardless of their record. I think NBC's not going to compete with themselves. NBC knows the gold mine they have with the golden helmets of Notre Dame. They're not going to do that. And to your point, NBC, if they keep the deals separate, when USC and Notre Dame play each other, NBC gets it automatically because of Notre Dame.
Yeah, I agree. Notre Dame is easily like one of the top 5, top 3 biggest programs in the world. So I don't think they really are worried about any Big Ten teams stealing their spotlight.
And I think that they use that as a advantage when Notre Dame plays Michigan, when Notre Dame plays Ohio State, when they play USC. Those games are going to automatically go to NBC, and
Well,
NBC is going to be put in a weird spot to have to
so
either move it to a night game or lose it.
so here are the top 10 games viewership wise from all last season. Number 10 was Ohio State Penn State on Fox, 8.3 million. Alabama Ole Miss on CBS, 8.7. Kansas State TCU, the Big Ten 12 Championship, 9.4. Notre Dame Ohio State was on ABC, 10.5 million. Alabama Texas on Fox was 10.6. Purdue Michigan was the Big Ten Championship, which drew 10.7 million. LSU Georgia, the SEC championship, was 10.9. Alabama Tennessee was 11.6. Tennessee Georgia was 13.1, and Michigan Ohio State was 17.1. So Notre Dame may have not even. Hold on. What I'm saying though is Notre Dame, without playing a Big Ten school, would not have made the top 10 viewership list last season if they did not play Ohio State. So, is NBC really not going to say, well, we could put Ohio State here on our instead of Notre Dame, or we could put Michigan, we could put Penn State, and we're going to draw equal viewership to what we get out of Notre Dame, if not more.
I think, but all of the games that you mentioned, all of those games were games that were already at a previous destination for a TV network. So those games you automatically knew were going to already be on Fox or CBS. To me, you took the top 10 games of the most viewership. That's going to change every year based on the top 10 teams in the country. If all of those teams were ranked inside the top 5 when those games happened, all of those games. So to me,
You're not wrong, but
if you go week by week, I promise you Notre Dame is in the top 5. week by week, every week, Notre Dame is in the top 5 of viewership on NBC. And that's just because there's only, you're not wrong in what you're saying, but Notre Dame is not going to join a conference because I don't think, and if NBC forced Notre Dame's hand, Notre Dame would have no choice. But I don't think NBC is going to do
Guys,
that.
but I mean, Notre Dame, here's it right from theirs. They average 2.5 million viewers per game, which is half of what they averaged the year before. So last year they
Right,
averaged 2.5. The year before they averaged 5.
right. But look at their schedule 2 years ago. Look at their schedule last year.
Last year they opened up and lost to Ohio State in a hard-fought game, right? But then
Yep.
that next week they got upset by Marshall. That kind of killed the season for a lot of Notre Damers.
Also, when you think about it, Notre Dame, okay, when Notre Dame has one loss, that USC game, that's a top 10 game in viewership. When they play Ohio State, that's a top 10 viewership. When they go back to playing Michigan every year, that's a top 10 viewership. So it's just about what their schedule was. Now, let me ask you something in rebuttal to your point, okay? If Tennessee is not in the top 5, is Georgia Tennessee a big matchup?
Not
If
Maybe,
as
probably
big.
Alabama,
not.
right, if Ole Miss is not in the top 10, is Alabama Ole
But
Miss a big matchup?
you're not wrong, but I'm looking at 2021's top 5
It's
or top
COVID.
10.
It's
No,
COVID.
no, 2021, post-COVID, not 2020, 2021, when fans were back in the stadium and everything. Notre Dame, Florida State, 7.8 million was the only game that they were in the top 10. Ohio State, Penn State, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan State, and of course Ohio State, Michigan were all the Big Ten games that were in the top 10.
And every single one of those Big Ten games would not be on NBC and still won't be on NBC.
But what I'm saying though is they will be now that they have a TV deal.
They won't, though. None of those games will end up on NBC. I'd be willing to bet money that none of those games will end up on NBC. Michigan State will probably be a CBS night game if I had to guess. Because they like to play the rivalry games at night. Michigan Penn State is going to end up on Fox. Ohio State Penn State's going to end up on Fox. And Michigan Ohio State is going to end up on Fox. Fox is not going. The thing is I think what this is going to do is it's going to bring those teams that you don't typically see on major networks to those networks. For instance, Nebraska with Matt Rule. That's a play for people to see Nebraska on live TV more than you would typically see them. Same thing with Wisconsin. If you don't live in or around Wisconsin, you're not going to see Wisconsin play unless you have Big Ten Network. You're going to see these teams that you don't typically see on live TV more often because of the TV contract. And that's just my opinion. But you're talking about the big major games. I think it's about everybody else. It's not about your Michigan, Ohio State, your Michigan, Penn State, your Ohio State, Penn State. Those teams, it's everybody else that's going to benefit. You're going to have a bigger viewership now on CBS for Indiana, Purdue, Nebraska, Michigan State. Those games that you typically wouldn't get a lot of viewership, you're going to get viewership because it's on CBS or it's on NBC. Notre Dame will never have to compete with anybody for viewership. If Ohio State, Michigan is on the same time that Notre Dame, USC is on, you're going to have split ratings. There's a reason why those games are played at different times.
Yeah, I agree with the point that this deal is much bigger for the mid-tier teams, lower-end teams. Ohio State, Michigan, they'll be on prime time no matter what. But
no matter
These
the
other,
station.
yeah, these other teams, the exposure is gonna jump significantly, and it's great for them.
And it's money in those pockets of those, not only the teams, but it's also for money for the TV, because CBS typically would be, you always get Georgia and Alabama, always Georgia, Alabama. But then there's that off game where you
But
have
but
Tennessee, Ole Miss,
after
that gets unbelievable
you're not
ratings.
wrong, but after this year, after the 2023 year season, CBS no longer has SEC football.
Right.
They're going to have only Big Ten football.
Right.
Okay?
But they
So
don't get the full slate.
you're not
But they're
wrong.
not.
They're going to have to split that, though, with Fox, and they're going to have to split that then a primetime game with NBC. But what I'm
If I had
saying,
to guess, Wisconsin would be the CBS frontrunner. That would be my guess, because you're going to have to basically. To me,
that
what's going to end up
but
happening
that's
is
what
you're
I'm
going to have
saying though
split.
is what I'm saying though is you have when you have USC and UCLA join the Big Ten, you have 7 teams that are all vying for key spots in games. And what's going to help USC and UCLA is you can put them on prime time here every single week on one of those stations because it's only 5 o'clock out there. And that helps USC and UCLA because you're not going to put them on noon. You're not going to put them on at noon out there in California. Mm-hmm. Let's just be honest, that ain't never going to happen. So really, you're telling CBS, Fox, and NBC, you're really locking in a primetime game for one of those two teams. If not, and what I'm saying though, Corey, is you're going to have it where Ohio State Notre Dame is going to be 7:30 on CBS at night in September. Well, and again, I'm not sure, how they're going to do this, but what happens when you do have the same week Ohio State and Michigan both play big non-conference opponents. USC is playing a big non-conference opponent, and UCLA plays a big in-conference game because it's week 4 or 5, and that's just the way their schedule worked.
One's at noon on Fox, one's at 3:30 on CBS, one's at 7:30 on NBC, and then you have the UCLA game, which won't be as important because UCLA supposedly is not as good as people think. Is going to end up at the 10 o'clock on whichever network probably Fox.
Right.
Which Fox now has the Pac-12 game anyway.
Well, right.
Fox has the
Pac-12
10 p.m. Yeah.
They do, but that's what I'm saying is that's where you're going to get lucky with USC and UCLA is you're going to have to put them sometimes in that time slot. But I'm saying when you have 7 teams that are potentially going to be and I could throw Wisconsin in there. When you have 8 teams that are going to be vying for those TV spots, it gets a little dicey on how you work that out week to week.
But of those 8 teams, how many of those 8 teams are actually playing meaningful games? That's the key to the whole TV deal, because the TV deal, you're talking about the big games. When these teams, out of those 8 teams, you're only going to have 4 of those teams that are playing a game that matters.
Maybe
and when I say that, it doesn't matter, because every time Ohio State plays and every time Michigan plays, it matters. They're always going to be on a TV thing. But when you have Northwestern playing ranked Minnesota, that game is going to be on over Michigan, Indiana.
But would it?
Yeah, it would.
See,
probably.
Maybe it depends.
It depends, yeah.
But that's
how good
what
is Indiana?
How good is Indiana that year? How good is Northwestern? Right. That's
it's
going to depend.
It's all about
what I'm saying. Well, right.
Money.
But what I'm saying though is it like Drew just said though, it depends on how good teams are going to be year to year, and that's actually the fairest statement to make, because like I'm saying though, what like you just said though, Core, what happens though when that Northwestern Minnesota game, that's a ranked matchup, big game, let's say, is falls on the same weekend. Ohio State plays Penn State, Michigan plays Michigan State, USC plays Wisconsin, Nebraska plays UCLA, and you have I'm just saying that there's going to be so much. Penn State plays another big game. It's just going to be chaos trying to fit all those teams in, and then on top of it, and this is where I'm getting to the point is NBC then goes, well, shit, we missed out on one of these big games because we have to have freaking Notre Dame at noon because they're playing Marshall, and we have a sole TV contract to have their game.
Let me ask you something. You really think the Big Ten's going to schedule all those games on one weekend?
I'm not saying that it's going to eventually happen.
So.
Especially with dude, guys, I'm telling you, will eventually happen. Maybe not next year, 2025, 2026, but I'm telling you by 2027, 2028, 2029, when we're nearing the end of this TV deal, when you have Minnesota's, Nebraska's, Iowa's of the Big Ten, when you're giving those teams $80 million a year because of this TV deal, and they're able to now, like you guys, like we've all mentioned before, pour money into recruiting, pour money into their facilities, get better talent, those are going to make those meaningless games that we view now, like Ohio State, Iowa, meaningless. We know what's going to happen. 2027, that's a big game. 2028.
It's a big game next year.
It's not a big game next. I mean, look,
every game's a big game.
Every
Saturday matters until the 12-team playoff.
Well, right, but even in the 12-team playoff, I mean, you're talking.
Most games matter.
Yeah, most games at that point matter, but like, it's not where I think it's going to be the easiest is when you're talking Ohio State, Toledo, Michigan, Central Michigan. When you have like your non-conference schedule, that's where having these lucrative, 3, 4 now networks to hold the Big Ten, including the Big Ten Network, is going to really pay off. Is when you have Ohio State versus Toledo, Michigan versus Central Michigan, Wisconsin versus Green Bay State. You know what I'm saying? Like when you have those little mid-major conference guys come up, that's where it's going to help. But when you get into the heart of the Big Ten and you have all these teams that are potentially going to be good, how do you justify missing out if you're NBC on a potential 8 million view game for Penn State Northwestern in a top 15 matchup, or Penn State Minnesota in a top 15 matchup?
Because the ratings aren't going to fight each other. That's the one thing you have to take into consideration.
What I'm saying,
you can't have three big games at noon and have all of the TVs fighting over it.
What I'm saying though is if you have but what I'm saying though is you have Penn State versus Minnesota, and they're both ranked inside the top 25, and NBC's looking at, they already have their primetime game set, and they go, now they missed out. What I'm saying is NBC, without Notre Dame being in the Big Ten, could potentially miss out on a lot more viewership by them sticking with Notre Dame at noon, or Notre Dame at putting them at a 3:30 time slot, because in that time slot, or that for that game, if you're only going to play 2 games like NBC said they are, you're now losing out on money if you're NBC, because you decided to put Notre Dame versus Texas Tech, or Notre Dame versus Wake Forest at noon, when you could have had Penn State, Minnesota at noon. Because that week, and I'm just saying, just because that week it worked out that Michigan was playing Wisconsin, and that was big noon kickoff. USC was playing Ohio State that weekend, so that's a primetime game because it's out in California. I'm just saying eventually that is going to be a possibility because of how many big teams you have in the conference, and you can't schedule all these games. Eventually you're going to have to schedule some of these on the same weekend.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that's just kind of the risk you take. I mean, you can't really predict how a team's going to play every year.
Well, right, but
Like you can assume that Ohio State's going to be Ohio State, but that's just an assumption.
absolutely. But I guess what I'm asking is, if you're NBC, are you kind of giving that elbow nudge to Notre Dame? Like, hey, we have this big deal with the Big Ten. You need to join their conference. Else we may not be able to do anything when our TV deal runs out.
No. Again, no. Because I feel like NBC would rather take the risk with Notre Dame than the other game. Because I think NBC knows going into it, what games do you really, when you really sit down and look at the schedule, what games do you think NBC is going to take? They're out of the big games. I would bet that the majority of the big games are going to end up being on Fox at noon, or will end up being CBS 3:30, or NBC is going to get stuck doing the night game.
Well, no, that's what they're doing. Is they're only they're
Right.
hosting. It's either, obviously with Ohio State coming, they're choosing that game to be the night game, their prime time. But
Right, but
outs,
do you think NBC will take? You think NBC would rather take Northwestern, or do you think they'd rather take USC?
but that's I understand that they're going to take
You know,
USC. But what I'm saying though, Core, is um I understand
your
they're going to.
big week games are going to end up being the Big Ten versus Notre Dame. In 2 years, Notre Dame's not going to schedule Wake Forest. They're going to have Purdue. They're going to have
But they're still going to have to
USC.
play that.
They're
They're still going to have
a
to
hundred,
play
a
that
hundred percent.
ACC
But NBC,
schedule.
100%. But NBC, I don't know. You don't know. We don't know. Like you said, the ACC might not be a conference. We don't know what's going to end up happening. It's one of those things where it's a waiting game. But at the end of the day, the one thing you can bank on is you can bank on that NBC will have a Notre Dame game on every single week, regardless of if they have to play a Big Ten game at 7:30, or if they choose to play Notre Dame at 7:30. It's going to be Notre Dame USC. It's
Right.
going to be Notre
But
Dame versus a Big Ten team.
what I'm saying though is what happens when Notre Dame has to choose between, or when, and what I'm saying though is when you have two big, like, let's say four major or five major Big Ten games go on. Notre Dame's playing Marshall, or here's their schedule this year. Notre Dame plays, let's Notre Dame's playing Duke. Are you really going to put Notre Dame versus Duke, if you're NBC, on over ranked Penn State, ranked Minnesota? Because they're Notre Dame and they're going to give you 2 million views? Or you're going to put on the or are you going to be like, maybe we should put on this ranked game because we already have Ohio State USC at our primetime game because it's being in California. All I'm saying is the way these schedules could fall, Core, it could put NBC into a very bind where they're choosing losing massive amounts of money just to accommodate their TV contract with Notre Dame. And what I'm
But
saying,
you're saying they're losing money. They're not losing money because Notre Dame's draw is insane.
but it's not. They're averaging 2 million viewers a game, up to 5 on good years. What I'm saying though is Penn State on a
Outside
good game.
outside of
Penn State
outside of
has.
Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, how many Big Ten teams draw more than 2.5 million
You're
for a game?
you're not wrong, but when you add USC, UCLA into that mix, that is what I'm saying.
USC
You're
outside of USC, I doubt there's UCLA had more than 2.5 million views per game.
Yeah, I think UCLA is coming in as a mid-tier team, mid-tier
Yeah.
program.
You're
Like,
you're not you're 8 teams. When you say you have 8 teams that your thing, you're assuming that all 8 teams are going to be good. Outside of those 8 teams, you probably have 3 or 4 teams every week that you could put on that's going to be solid. And out of those 3 or 4 games, I doubt all 3 or 4 of those games are going to out viewership Notre Dame.
I,
Your big games, absolutely, 100%. But when you think about it, when the NBC takes over the Big Ten, NBC, that Notre Dame USC game is going to have more viewership than 90% of any other college football game. If both teams are good, if both teams are bad, you're still going to get viewership because it's Notre Dame. Notre Dame last year may not have had a top 10, may not have had a top 10 game without the Big Ten. But I guarantee you, out of the 100 viewership games, Notre Dame's schedule is probably 13 of those top 100 in viewership.
a good number,
And
yeah.
NBC is not going to lose money. When you say they're going to lose money, yeah, they might miss out on a few good games. But to them, they look at it and go, okay, but out of those few good games, Notre Dame is going to give us 2 or 3 good games that the Big Ten can't have. That's just what I think. I just personally know
I mean,
Notre
like,
Dame, and I
I'm
know
just
where
saying,
they
I'm
are.
just saying, like,
And they were bad
here's
last year. They were
okay,
bad last year,
but
and they still had 2.5 million views per
right.
game.
Well, but what I'm saying though is you look at it this way, like look at it. Penn State, Maryland drew 2 million views. Notre Dame Navy drew 2.07. So 7,000 more people watched that than
But
Penn State,
what?
Maryland.
That's the same week.
That was the
That's the same
same
week.
week. That was the
Okay,
same week.
what was the viewership for Notre Dame Marshall?
So Ohio State, Indiana, that same week drew 3.3.
And what did Notre Dame do?
2. So let's go. What was that
And
week
what time
two? Week 2 they lost to.
was that the same was it at the same time? Was it on at the same
Yep.
time?
Yep. Ohio State drew 1.3 million more views for playing Indiana at noon on Fox than they did playing Navy.
100%.
Okay.
But let me ask you
Hold on.
something.
Hold on.
If Notre Dame beats Ohio State, does Ohio State Indiana draw more than Notre Dame Marshall? No. What do you think,
Who
Drew?
knows?
What do you think?
I
Who
do.
knows, dude?
But you're also competing Notre Dame Ohio State.
No, but
You're not saying that. You're talking about Wisconsin,
I'm
USC,
yes, I'm talking
UCLA.
about when you
Those
add all of those teams into this mix with Ohio State and Michigan, you have a serious conversation like USC Marshall. Hold on, hold on.
it's of course a possibility.
Time right, but that's all I'm saying is that eventually when these conferences are going to grow because eventually Oregon and Washington I have a feeling are coming to the Big 10. It's already been talked about.
It
I think
feels
we
like
could I
inevitable.
think Drew, do you feel that way too?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so when you add those two teams in and now you have this lucrative deal with NBC, I I guess what I'm saying though is how if you're NBC, how do you not say Notre Dame? You gotta join the Big Ten. We have this TV deal with them. We can put you prime time. We could get we could all make so much more money if you join the Big Ten. Is I guess what I'm saying versus us having to choose between a potential big game and Notre Dame, where you could have USC, like USC Stanford, and Stanford was god awful last year. Drew 2.9 damn near 3 million, and Notre Dame Marshall was 2.5.
But my rebuttal to that would be is if they did make that deal, then in reverse to your thing, you're giving Notre Dame a game that may not even be worth the game.
But what I'm saying though is if Notre Dame, okay, so to rebuttal that, if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten, you revive Notre Dame USC, Notre Dame Michigan, Notre Dame Michigan State, Notre Dame Ohio State. So there's potentially 4 perennial games that Notre Dame's going to play every single year. Those are going to be probably 4 of the highest rated games in college football. Outside of, and you can even,
Depending on if they're
depending on if they're
good.
good or not.
If they're 8-4, no, they're
No,
not.
no. But what I'm saying though is if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten, now NBC doesn't have to make a decision. Because now instead of making a decision between Notre Dame, Wake Forest, they're making a decision between Notre Dame, Iowa, Penn State, Minnesota. And they're going to
I just
put
think
Notre Dame, Iowa on over Penn State. That's all I'm saying is if they join the Big Ten, now there's no discussion behind it. And there's no.
but then you have favorites, but then you're playing favorites with them and throwing it in there. I don't again, it all comes down to money and what games are going to make the teams the most what network is going to make the most money for their buck, right? That's what it's going to come down to. And most weeks Notre Dame, whoever they're playing, is going to probably make more money than some Big Ten. And that's just my opinion. Now, obviously, certain weeks are going to apply. I wish Notre Dame would join the Big Ten. I wish Notre Dame would join the Big Ten because then not only do you have 3 teams that are going to make the playoff every year, you have probably 4 or 5.
Right.
But Notre Dame is selfish. They've always been selfish. They want to be Notre Dame. They want to be Notre Dame. They don't want to be Notre Dame Big Ten Conference. They want to be Notre Dame. So Notre Dame, at the end of the day, if Notre Dame has to lose NBC because of that, Notre Dame will be okay because they're Notre Dame. They'll do their own thing.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, every NBC, CBS, ESPN, Fox, they'll all want Notre Dame rights. Like the Notre Dame rights are big time, just because their fan base is so huge. They will get ratings.
Their deal with NBC was 3 times what Texas was.
Yeah, and that deal's comes up in 24. Their current,
and they're
right
seeking
now,
$75 million. I saw.
Yeah, right now Notre Dame's making $22 million a year on a deal that was made about 10 years ago. So probably good for the time, no longer good now. So this new deal they're searching for is going to put them in the range of 70 to 80, which is what the Big Ten schools are making. If they make that deal, then why the hell would they join a conference?
You're not wrong.
They're already making their money.
Right. But what I'm saying though is I guess if they're not going to make that, then you obviously have to join one.
Then you're going to have to consider it, yeah. And the Ace,
but I think they'll get it.
Yeah, they're Notre Dame. They're different.
And that's not to say anything different because I'm here to tell you, Nick, if Michigan and Ohio State were independents, they would be doing the same thing. But
this goes back to my thing more. But I just
where the deal helps, like we go back to, would the deal's going to help Illinois, Indiana, those teams, if they were on their own, there's no way they would make $70 million.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And with helping them, those teams are going to get better. Every year, these programs are going to start getting better when they're getting $80 million to help out with their funding. Now, if they're going to throw that all into the football program, God knows what they're going to do with it. But I'm saying $80 million, even if it's 10 to 12 million a year that the football team sees, that's still going to help Northwestern, Iowa, Purdue, Indiana, Rutgers, Maryland, all of them. It's going to help. It would even help Ohio State, Michigan, because now we can pay our assistant coaches we could pay them more to stop Jeff Hafley leaving for Boston College to become a head coach. You could pay, you know what I'm saying, Corey? You could pay your assistant coaches a lot more, make them the highest paid coaches in the country, even more than what they would make as a head coach. And you could say, if you want to be a head coach, fine, but just letting you know you're going to make more money here at Ohio State and be an offensive coordinator. We're going to go win some national titles. You're going to make
I
more
don't
at Michigan.
see. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think. For instance, Michigan and Ohio State. Yeah, you could pay them more, 100%. They make pretty good. I'm
Oh,
pretty sure Ohio State assistant coaches make upwards of $1 million, if not
two,
more. Right, right,
but
exactly. Same at Michigan. My thing is where this deal helps Michigan and Ohio State is it's extra money that they can put into things that they wouldn't necessarily have the money to put into.
well,
And
right,
that's it, and I don't think that
but
necessarily is coaching. I think it's more going to be whatever. I just
so
think I think the deal doesn't hurt Michigan and Ohio State. It doesn't really help them. They
no,
stay the same
oh,
way they are. It just helps
it
those smaller
enhances the
schools.
Big Ten.
And to be
Enhances the Big Ten
100,
as a
it,
whole.
it
But
it puts the Big
but
Ten
like
above the SEC in my
but I
opinion.
just 1000% it does in my opinion as well. But I was just reading here from Notre Dame, the Irish Wire reported from them that in their new TV contract, and Notre Dame will reach out to ensure that they are not excluded from college football playoff expanded entry. However, though, it has been talked about and talked to Notre Dame directly that they will not be eligible for a first round bye as staying as an independent. And that's directly from their website. That's from the Irish Wire. That's from Notre Dame who's reporting that. Supposedly.
Supposedly.
But now, I mean, if you're talking though 4 or 5 teams undefeated, Notre Dame is one of them. How are you going to deny a 14-0 conference champion?
If there's two teams that are undefeated and one of them's Notre Dame, how are you going to deny Notre Dame a top 2 seed?
That's pretty fair.
That's that.
It's
I'm looking at the
everything.
same article. That just looks
Everything
ridiculous.
That does.
everything is
What?
rumored, and the thing is
Yeah,
is
yeah.
what's going to happen is the deal that the Big Ten signed with all of these whatever. What's going to end up happening is either one of those networks is going to benefit way more than they thought they were and is going to try to buy out the rest of the networks to have all of them, or you could be looking
It's
at the
true.
Big Ten, who's very smart and saying, you know what, our product needs to get out there. We know Michigan and Ohio State is going to draw. We want these other schools to draw. So then what's going to end up happening is one of these networks is going to have to buy us.
Okay.
And the Big Ten is either it could go a number of ways, and it's all rumors. Everything
I
is just a rumor
got a
until it
question
happens.
for you. Obviously, Notre Dame was the big topic because of where their region is located. I mean, they're basically in Big Ten country, so it only makes sense that we talk about Notre Dame, and then their potential joining the Big Ten with this TV contract. We talked about the I mentioned how the ACC is talking about disbanding, which led to Notre Dame being talked about joining the Big Ten. If you guys had your pick of any ACC schools, which ones would you guys bring? Um, I eliminated personally when I thought about this right away. I eliminated Florida State and Miami because I think no matter I thought to myself, no way in hell they would ever join the Big Ten. They would join the SEC, in my opinion. So to me, that wasn't even an option I entertained was Florida State, the U. The two schools I could see most likely that are in the ACC conference for all sports that I could see leaving and joining the Big Ten are UNC and Duke. To enhance the basketball side, UNC with Mac Brown's getting a little more national credit on the college football side. And I could actually see them leaving the ACC and joining the Big Ten. As well as I forget what it's called. That's bad on my part. But the Big Ten has this big technological science sharing program that they're a part of. There's a special name for it. But Duke and UNC are a part of that. And the Big Ten is very high on their academic prowess in the science technology world and the sharing of that information. So with that, I could really see that happening. So those would be my two picks that I would personally want in the Big Ten. Is I would take UNC and Duke just for basketball purposes and enhance our basketball conference. Because and I don't know about you guys, but when you add USC and UCLA, to me, that enhances our football conference enough to where I don't need to poach a Clemson from the ACC.
Yeah.
I think it going back. I think you just have to keep in mind
Well, who would you pick,
that
Core? Who,
I mean,
if you had to add
I
two
would
teams, who
love
would you
to have
add?
UNC. I would love to have UNC and Duke. I just don't think
No, it's not who do you.
where it's. I think
I'm
they're
saying
going to end
if
up in the SEC. But I mean, I think
who would you pick?
if I had to, I mean, if I had to pick out of the ACC, I'd probably take Virginia Tech and Clemson. I just
Okay.
biggest names in football. That's what you're going to go for. The Big Ten is never known for basketball. They never are going to be known for basketball. No matter if they're good or not, they're a one seed, whatever. They're a football conference. It's just the way it is. The majority of it is money is made in football. So you go with the big footballs. Now, out of the ACC, if I look at it regionally sound, if they disperse, you're going to get Virginia and Virginia Tech probably because everybody else is South and they're going to go to ESPN.
Drew, you could choose two teams out of the ACC. Who are you picking?
Well, the only thing that matters, the only thing that makes money in college sports is football. So it's all about the football. And Pittsburgh is a no-brainer for me. Pittsburgh plays Big Ten football. I don't know why they're in the ACC. And then I think Virginia Tech would be awesome. A lot of prestige and a good academic school. Talking about academic schools, there's Wake Forest would be a good one. Not a very good athletic school, but academically speaking, that
One
They
of
makes
were
the
good at
top
sense.
in the
basketball
country.
in the 90s.
Yes.
Well, they
And
had Skip
football every
Prosser.
5, 6 years.
They had Skip Prosser.
Hmm.
Chris Paul, bro.
Uh, yeah, I would
Tim
I,
Duncan, bruh.
I would go Pitt and VTech. I think those would
Okay.
be fun.
If
Florida, to get to your point, Florida, I don't want the Florida teams either in the Big Ten. Doesn't make sense to me. But LA also doesn't make sense to me. But if the Big Ten could break into the Florida market, that would be huge for the conference.
I think you're not
I
wrong.
think you got a better
If
shot at the U than Florida State.
I do think you're right there,
Yeah,
Core. I
I
think if you're
agree.
gonna poach anybody out of Florida, I think it would be the U.
Yeah.
Um, I would have a hard time seeing Clemson leave. Um, join the Big Ten just because their main rival is South Carolina and they're already in the SEC. But I mean, if I had to choose, like, to enhance, I guess, our football side of our conference out of the ACC, and you're not taking basketball into the equation at all, I agree with you guys. Virginia Tech, I think, would be the one that you would really have to go poach. And then I think the second one is you would have to put not all your eggs into the basket, but 99.9% of them into the U. Because getting that South Beach market and opening up a pipeline for the Big Ten down into South Beach and that even opens you into that rest of the Florida market, like you were saying, Drew, for recruiting.
Mhm.
St. Aquinas down there. I mean, the Bosa brothers came from there. They just pump out talent.
Yeah. Florida is consistently a top 3 recruiting state. And another piece that would be fun would be Georgia Tech, the Atlanta market. Georgia has become a top 6 state in recruiting. So breaking into the Georgia market would be huge.
It would, but
Just tech is traditionally let's go back 100 years. Georgia Tech's awesome. I mean, nowadays not so much, but
I
Their
was gonna
academics are good.
I was just gonna say,
yeah, and
like,
the
I don't
academics are
know if
killer.
Georgia Tech would be that program, but it would be a stepping stone into the Georgia market.
It would be one of those if you want to hit the academic market as
It's a
well as expand to different states.
it's a smaller school that the SEC probably wouldn't take.
Yeah, I don't
Yep.
think they would.
So I mean, like that's what you're going to end up with if the ACC disperses. You're going to end up with the SEC poaching who they want to stay with ESPN, and then you're going to have the smaller schools like Georgia Tech and stuff where you could potentially break in with the Big Ten.
I like it. That's all I had really for today, guys. Kind of I mean, we nailed everything I felt. Did you actually last thing here. Ethan sent it to us. He's not here today. He sent us at least one MEC team, Mid-American Conference team, has beaten at least one Big Ten team since 2005. Which game will it likely be this year? I just wanted to get your thoughts before we go. We have Wisconsin, Buffalo, Toledo at Illinois, Eastern Michigan at Minnesota, BG for our boy Drew at Michigan. Who was that? What was that guy's? What was that wide receiver's name that we used to say all the time?
Freddie Barnes.
Freddie Barnes. Where's Freddie Barnes at? Um, Northern Illinois at Nebraska, and then Western Michigan at Iowa. If I had to pick one of those games, I'm gonna say it's Toledo over Illinois or Western Michigan over Iowa. Core?
I mean, I feel like it's probably Buffalo or Northern
Illinois.
Illinois over Nebraska because
For
new
some,
coaches, new systems. I feel like Nebraska probably won't win anyway. Out of those, I feel like NIU is probably the most likely. But like I could see, I mean, Toledo always plays tough, so I could see them.
I just don't
Iowa, I
see.
think I don't think Iowa's going to lose at home with all the transfers and talent they have. I just think when you look at it,
Wouldn't that be something?
Nebraska and Wisconsin have new coaches. So you really, when you play those games, you don't know what you're getting from those schools.
Out of those two, I think Nebraska's the most likely. I don't think with Luke Fickell's Big Ten previous history being a defensive coordinator at Ohio State, I don't think he loses to Buffalo because I feel like he's going to play a Big Ten game like Jim Harbaugh. I'm going to run the ball down your throat because my guys are bigger and better. Drew,
I
my
agree
bad
with you.
guy.
I also think Wisconsin has much better team than Nebraska. So the obvious one here for me is Toledo over Illinois. Illinois lost almost all of their secondary. They still have an excellent defense. Like their D line is sick. Plus, Brett Bielema is a phenomenal defensive coach. But Toledo returns everyone from a team who won double-digit games last year.
Mhm.
I think they're going to win double-digit games this year. The schedule's not bad, and they are very, very good. I don't know much about Buffalo. I think that would be very surprising for me, especially at Camp Randall. Emu's all right. I think Minnesota handles them. BG could be a surprise, but Michigan's just too damn good. Western Michigan might be the worst team in the MAC this year, so I can't go with them. And Northern Illinois, I think, is going to be quite legit. They still have Rocky Lombardi, the quarterback that was at Michigan State a couple of years ago. They're coming off a rough season, but they had hella injuries and they returned mostly everyone. So first, I would go Toledo over Illinois and then NIU over Nebraska.
I like it. I like it. Well, guys, I want to thank you for your time here this Sunday morning. I appreciate you guys. We'll be back next week with another episode here. Hopefully Ethan can join us. He's been on a 2-week hiatus, traveling a little bit, so we'll get a word from his travels, how they went. You guys take care. Peace out. Enjoy your Sunday and Memorial Day weekend, everybody.